I still remember the electricity in the air that morning, though I had no idea how literal that feeling would become. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, a dull gray that seemed to press down on our quiet neighborhood, but the real storm was brewing inside our kitchen. My mother, Lauren Whitmore, paced back and forth, her black slacks crisp, her movements precise, but there was a rare tension in her posture. She scrolled through her phone, her famous prosecutor's frown deepening with each second. The same woman who once made me Star Trek insignia-shaped pancakes every Saturday, the same mother who taught me how to spot bias in news articles before I even hit middle school, was now scowling at an email like it was a death threat. I took another bite of my cereal, watching her out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't unusual for Mom to get fired up over legal cases, but this wasn't about work. This was something personal. The moment she set her phone down with a sharp, weary sigh, I knew it was bad. "Ethan," she said, voice clipped, like she was trying to rein in her temper. "I think we just stepped on some very stupid toes." For a woman who never wasted words, calling something stupid meant it was big. I picked up her phone, reading the subject line that practically screamed at me in bold, capitalized letters, "Final warning, past due notice, $47 fine." I blinked. Wait. This is about $47? For the first time in my 15 years, I saw something in my mother's face I had never seen before, not in the courtroom, not during late-night legal battles, not even when she argued with my dad about his job keeping him away from home too often. Frustration. Real, raw frustration. And beneath that, a flicker of something else. Something that looked dangerously close to fury. "Not just $47, she corrected, her voice sharper than before. "It's about control. About power." That was when I noticed how tightly she was gripping the coffee mug in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, knuckles white against the ceramic. "The fine," she explained, "was from the Oakleaf Creek Homeowners Association, our neighborhood's beloved little dictatorship." I leaned back in my chair, trying to understand why a woman who had prosecuted violent criminals, sent corrupt officials to prison, and terrified defense attorneys in court was suddenly worked up over a homeowners association. "So, what? We just pay it and move on?" She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "That's exactly what they want." As she spoke, she opened a drawer, pulled out a crisp stack of papers, and slid one across the table to me. A printed email from 3 weeks ago. Subject line, "Submitted landscaping plan approved, no objections filed." The attachment showed photos of our front yard, the newly laid gravel driveway that replaced the patchy sod we'd struggled to maintain in Florida's relentless heat. We had followed every guideline, submitted every document on time, and received no pushback, until now. "They never rejected the plan," Mom continued, voice tightening. "They just ignored it. And now that the work is done, they're pretending it violates their rules." She tapped the phone screen, pulling up the email again. "This is the second notice in less than a week. The first was of warning. This one says if we don't pay, they'll start tacking on late fees or worse, put a lien on the house." I frowned. "Wait. A lien? Over $47? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You'd be surprised how often HOAs do this. It starts small, but if you pay, they find more violations. More ways to fine you. Eventually, they've got a grip on your property. And once they do, good luck trying to fight back." The words sent an uneasy chill through me. We had lived in Oakleaf Creek for almost a decade. It was the kind of perfectly manicured suburban community where retirees walked their dogs every morning, kids played on tree-lined sidewalks, and mailboxes had to match a very specific shade of beige. The HOA had always been annoying, but they'd never seemed aggressive. Until now. I studied my mother's expression. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating. Analyzing the battle ahead, the way she always did when a fight was inevitable. Finally, she muttered under her breath, almost too low for me to hear. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." I swallowed hard, glancing out the window. The overcast sky felt heavier than before. I had no way of knowing that this petty little fine would spiral into something far bigger, far uglier than either of us could have imagined. But I should have known, because when my mother decided to fight, she never lost. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and nearly tripped over a neatly folded notice tucked under our front door. My stomach dropped before I even unfolded the paper. The HOA wasn't done with us. Violation notice, immediate attention required. My fingers clenched the paper as I scanned the details. A new complaint. This time, they were claiming our mailbox was non-compliant. I knew for a fact that wasn't true. The mailbox was barely 5 months old, and we had installed it after getting written approval from the previous HOA administration. I stepped back inside, tossing the letter onto the kitchen table where Mom was already seated, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She barely glanced at the paper before exhaling sharply. "Of course," she muttered. "They're playing dirty." By the time I left for school, I had a bad feeling that things weren't going to stop there. And I was right. That afternoon, as I walked up the driveway, I spotted a man in a navy blue polo with the HOA logo embroidered on his chest. He was holding a clipboard, phone in hand, snapping pictures of our house. I immediately recognized him, Greg, one of the HOA's so-called inspectors. I dropped my backpack just inside the door and strode outside. "Excuse me," I called, stepping toward him. "Can I help you with something?" Greg barely glanced at me. "Routine inspection." I folded my arms. "That's funny. My mom submitted everything for approval a month ago. And now you're here, after we've already been fined?" Greg sighed as if he had heard this argument 1,000 times before. "Look, kid. I just document what I see. I don't make the rules." I clenched my jaw. They were fishing for violations. Looking for any excuse to pile on fines and make our life miserable. Mom was already in the driveway by the time Greg finished scribbling his notes. She was calm, professional, but I could tell from the way she gripped her phone that she was on edge. "Where's the official notice of inspection?" she asked. Greg gave a half smirk, half shrug. "It was scheduled this morning." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "Interesting. HOA policy requires written notice 48 hours in advance for property inspections." Greg hesitated. He knew he was caught. "I'll follow up with the board," he muttered before hastily retreating to his car. But the real battle started that evening. By the time dinner rolled around, another official HOA email had arrived. This one had escalated our fine from $47 to $135 for multiple infractions, including our porch lighting, which was supposedly too bright, and weeds in the front yard. There were no weeds. It wasn't just us. Over the next few days, I overheard whispers from our neighbors. Other homeowners were suddenly getting hit with violations, too. The pattern was clear. Anyone who supported us was suddenly finding themselves under HOA scrutiny. Then came the most infuriating twist. Friday afternoon, Mom sat at her laptop, compiling all our documented approvals and past correspondences to formally challenge the violations. She had every email, every timestamp, every image proving that we had followed the rules. She hit send, a perfectly crafted response outlining every legal reason why the fines were illegitimate. But the next morning, she checked her inbox. The email was gone. Not just unanswered. Gone. Every message she had sent to the HOA in the past 3 weeks was missing from her account. She checked the HOA's online portal, where records of approvals and submissions were stored. The approval for our gravel driveway? Deleted. The response she had sent the night before? No record of it ever existing. I watched as my mother's expression shifted from anger to something colder. Something dangerous. "They're covering their tracks," she said quietly. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "They're trying to erase the evidence," I murmured. Mom nodded. "And if they think that's going to work," she let out a slow breath. "They have no idea who they just picked a fight with." But the final straw came that Sunday. A bright orange sticker was slapped across our front door in bold, capitalized letters. "Noncompliance notice, act now." Mom yanked it off and crumpled it in her fist. Across the street, I saw neighbors watching. Some quickly shut their blinds. Others just stood there, unsure whether they should step in. That was when I overheard Mrs. Patterson, one of the few people who had openly supported us, whispering to another neighbor. "The HOA president. Cynthia Marshall," she said in a hushed tone. "I heard she has history with Lauren. A personal grudge." My blood ran cold. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power. And they weren't going to stop until my mother either backed down, or was forced out. Monday afternoon, I was halfway through a history assignment when I heard a sharp knock on the front door. The sound echoed through the house, stiff and mechanical, like the person on the other side wasn't just visiting, but delivering something they wanted to be seen. I stood up, peering through the front window. A man in a private security uniform stood on our porch. His cheap badge reflected the afternoon sun, and his broad stance screamed authority complex. I knew who he was before he even spoke. Dwayne Carter. HOA's hired muscle. Mom had just gotten home from court and was setting her briefcase down when she noticed him too. Without hesitation, she strode to the door and pulled it open. "Can I help you?" she asked, tone clipped and professional. Dwayne didn't even blink. He pulled a rolled-up notice from under his arm and slapped it against the door with enough force to rattle the frame. "Final eviction warning," he said, expression blank. For a long second, silence stretched between them. Then Mom exhaled slowly. "An eviction warning? Based on what grounds?" Dwayne crossed his arms. "Unpaid fines, repeated non-compliance, failure to follow corrective action." I saw Mom's jaw tighten. "Let's get something straight," she said, voice dropping to the same icy calm she used in courtrooms. "You are not law enforcement. You are not an officer of the court. You do not have the legal authority to evict anyone from their property. And you sure as hell aren't stepping foot in my house." Dwayne's fingers hovered over his belt, and I felt my stomach turn as I saw what he was reaching for. A taser. Mom must have seen it too, because she took a slow step back. "If you want me to remove this fraudulent notice, you can take it up with my attorney," she continued. "But as of now, you're trespassing." Dwayne narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, if you interfere with official HOA compliance orders, I have the right to enforce." Mom reached for the paper, tearing it off the door. Dwayne moved fast. Before I could even react, there was a sharp crackling sound, the sudden snap of electricity charging the air, and then a pained gasp. My mother staggered backward, hands jerking toward her side as the taser's metal prongs sank into her arm. The electrical current hit her like a whip, her body stiffening, her knees buckling. Then, just like that, she collapsed. For a second, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. My mind refused to process what I had just seen. Then I snapped. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, lunging forward. Dwayne jerked the taser back, stepping away like he had just neutralized a criminal. "She was resisting compliance," he muttered. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tear that taser out of his hands and throw it into the street. Instead, I dropped to my knees beside my mom. She was still conscious, eyes blinking rapidly, muscles trembling from the shock. "Mom? Mom, talk to me." Her fingers curled weakly. She was breathing, but I could tell the pain was bad. Then I heard shouting from the street. Our neighbors had seen everything. Mrs. Patterson, the older woman who had supported Mom, was hurrying over, horror etched across her face. Someone called the police. In the distance, I heard the wail of sirens. Dwayne backed up, his earlier confidence fading as he realized he had just made a massive mistake. Then I heard Dad's voice. "What did you do to her?" He came barreling out of his car, face pale with rage as he saw Mom on the ground. He dropped beside her, hands hovering like he wanted to help but didn't know how. "I'm okay," Mom rasped, even though she wasn't. The first police car pulled up. Then a second. Officers stepped out, eyes flicking from Dwayne's still smoking taser to my mother, still trembling from the shock. One officer, Detective Owens, marched toward Dwayne. "Step away from the weapon," he ordered. Dwayne lifted his hand slightly, but didn't look sorry. "She interfered with an official notice," he muttered. "I was within my rights to use non-lethal force." Detective Owens' face twisted with disgust. "Non-lethal force? She's a homeowner. You just tossed a resident on her own damn property." One of the paramedics lifted Mom onto a stretcher, checking her vitals. Dad climbed into the ambulance beside her. I wanted to follow, but something held me back. I turned toward Detective Owens, rage burning in my chest. "Are you arresting him?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The detective hesitated. "We're detaining him for questioning." "That's not enough," I snapped. "He attacked her. He needs to be charged." Another officer, a younger one, must have recognized my mom's last name, because his expression shifted. "Wait. Lauren Whitmore? The prosecutor?" Detective Owens' entire demeanor changed. He exchanged a glance with his partner. Tossing a random homeowner was one thing. Tossing a high-profile prosecutor? That was a whole different ballgame. I saw the moment Dwayne realized he had seriously screwed up. "Come on," Detective Owens said, grabbing his radio. "We're taking him in." I watched as Dwayne was escorted into the squad car, the same smugness he'd carried before now completely gone. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the ambulance doors shut, I saw Mom lift her head slightly, her face still pale but her eyes burning with quiet fury. "Don't worry," she murmured, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm pressing charges." I clenched my fists. She wasn't the only one. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and coffee, probably because Dad had been drinking it non-stop since we got there. Mom was propped up against a stack of pillows, and .4 drip in her arm, her other arm wrapped in a compression bandage where the taser prongs had sunk into her skin. Despite the lingering tremors in her fingers, she was already back in fight mode. She scrolled through her phone, her face a mask of cold determination. I knew that look. It was the same one she wore in court when she was about to destroy someone on the witness stand. Dad sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Lauren, maybe we should." "No," she cut in, eyes still on the screen. "I'm pressing full charges. Assault. Battery. Negligence. And if the HOA played any role in authorizing that rent-a-cop's actions, I'm taking them down with him." I watched as she opened a new email draft, her fingers moving with precise, methodical fury. "Ethan," she said without looking up, "I need you to grab my laptop from home." It wasn't a request. It was a command. I nodded and was about to leave when there was a soft knock at the door. A nervous-looking man stepped inside, Mr. Bennett, our neighbor from down the street. He clutched his hat in his hands, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. "Lauren, I just wanted to say, my wife and I saw what happened. And we want you to know, we're with you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "That guard had no right to do what he did. If you need us to testify, we'll do it. Mom blinked in surprise, then set her phone down. Something in her steely expression softened, just a little. Thank you, she said, her voice quieter than before. Mr. Bennett nodded, gave me a firm pat on the shoulder, then left. As soon as the door shut, Mom's phone buzzed. She snatched it up, eyes narrowing. Then she smirked. Well, she murmured. I leaned over, reading the name on the screen. District Attorney's Office. She answered on the second ring. Yes, this is Lauren Whitmore. Yes, I'm pressing charges. And I want to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. Dad shot me a look. I knew what he was thinking. The HOA had no idea what they'd just started. The smear campaign begins. By the time we got home, the HOA had gone into full damage control mode. An official statement had been posted on the community's website. Oakleaf Creek HOA deeply regrets the incident involving one of our security personnel. However, we must clarify that Mrs. Whitmore has a history of hostility toward HOA officials and has repeatedly ignored compliance orders. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Mom, they're blaming you. She barely reacted. Of course they are. Then it got worse. The HOA had produced witness statements from so-called neighbors claiming Mom had been aggressive toward McNeil, as if she had provoked him. Mom scrolled through the list, her jaw tightening. These names. I don't recognize half of them. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the community directory. One by one, I searched for the people listed in the statements. Nothing. A few addresses didn't even exist. Others belonged to vacant homes. They're fake, I breathed. The HOA fabricated witnesses. Mom sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. They're trying to bury me, she muttered. That was when Mrs. Patterson knocked on our door. She stepped inside, eyes darting nervously. Lauren, I just got a letter. No return address. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. HOA members who associate with troublemakers may face consequences. Be careful who you stand with. I felt a sick twist of rage in my stomach. They're threatening people, I said. Mom's lips curled into something almost like a smile, but it wasn't amusement. It was the kind of smile that said, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and turned to me. Ethan, get in the car. The HOA's biggest mistake. Mom didn't drive to the police station. She drove to the county courthouse. I followed her inside as she filed a civil lawsuit against Oakleaf Creek HOA and Dwayne Carter. Then she did something that sent shockwaves through the entire community. She filed a motion for a forensic audit of the HOA's financial records. I didn't fully understand why until later that night. Mom sat at the dining table, laptop open, documents spread out like a battlefield. I hovered over her shoulder, watching as she scrolled through financial reports she had pulled from the HOA's public disclosures. Then she stopped. A single line item was highlighted on the screen. Administrative expenses, $42,500. There was no further breakdown. No details. Just one massive, vague charge. Mom's expression darkened. She clicked through several other months' reports. Same thing. Tens of thousands of dollars disappearing into administrative expenses. My breath caught. Mom, what does that mean? She tapped the screen, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. It means, she said slowly, I just found out why they wanted me out. I swallowed. What do you mean? She sat back, crossing her arms. They weren't just trying to fine us out of the neighborhood, she murmured. They were hiding something. And they knew if I dug too deep, I'd find it. I stared at her. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. This was fraud. This was corruption. And my mother, the wrong person to mess with, had just found the smoking gun. The fallout came faster than even I expected. Once Mom submitted the forensic audit request, things spiraled out of control for the HOA. Within days, investigators uncovered missing funds, backdated fines, and fabricated expense reports, all pointing back to Cynthia Marshall. The so-called administrative expenses turned out to be personal payments funneled into a private account linked to Cynthia, along with suspicious transfers to an unnamed security contractor. By the end of the week, the county prosecutor, Mom's own colleague, announced a criminal investigation into HOA financial misconduct. Cynthia vanished overnight, refusing to answer calls. Some neighbors whispered that she had fled to stay with relatives out of state. Others claimed she was in talks with a defense attorney. Either way, she wasn't coming back. Then came the final blow. The police confirmed that Dwayne Carter had cut a deal, pleading guilty to aggravated battery in exchange for testifying against the HOA. He admitted that Cynthia had personally encouraged him to use force if necessary. His words sealed the HOA's fate. Under pressure from lawsuits, criminal charges, and furious homeowners, the board collapsed. Every remaining member resigned, hoping to avoid legal consequences. The HOA itself was dissolved, its power shattered, its name tarnished beyond repair. The community changed overnight. The neighbors who once hid behind their curtains started speaking out, demanding new leadership and protections against HOA abuses. The remaining homeowners voted to replace the HOA with a simple neighborhood council, one that had no power to fine or harass. And just like that, the tyrants were gone. On the evening of the settlement hearing, Mom and I drove home in silence. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw the last few faded HOA notices still crumpled in a pile near our doorstep. Mom walked up the path, reached down, and tore the final violation sticker off the mailbox, crumpling it in her fist. She turned to me with a small, satisfied smirk. They picked the wrong family. I looked around at our neighborhood, finally quiet, finally free. The gravel driveway, the mailbox, the porch lighting, everything was exactly as it had always been. All of this, over a $47 fine. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. Mom, was it worth it? She didn't even hesitate. Every second. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.